the emissions-free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Saturday night and this is the Saturday 5. I'm Darren Grimes along with Albie Amoncona, Belinda DeLucy, Benjamin Butterworth and Poppy Colburn. Tonight on the show, if you want your Bens to have houses, reduce mass migration.
Suella was wrong about many things, but she was right to talk about the values of migrants crossing the Channel.
It's time to celebrate the stiff upper lip after Nigel Farage demonstrated it so well in the jungle last night.
Why I agree with Her Late Majesty, we must pay for the security of Harry and Meghan.
And why it's time to end the COVID inquiry fast once and for all.
It's 7 p.m. and this is the Saturday 5. Welcome to the Saturday 5. Now, folks, Nigel Farage might be in the jungle, but it's going to be much more wild in here over the next hour. Every week, join Albie, Benjamin and myself, along with our guest stars. Tonight, it's the former Brexit Party MEP Belinda DeLucy and a new face to the show, the assistant US opinion editor at The Telegraph and GB News contributor Poppy Colburn. This is going to be a bumpy ride. You know the ropes. Each of us gets 60 seconds to outline an argument about a chosen topic. There may not be any Bush Tucker trials here, but Benjamin Butterworth is, which is arguably worse. And of course, we want to know your views as well. Get in touch by emailing gbviews@gbnews.com. But before we get into it, it's time for your Saturday night news with Sophia Wensler.
Thank you, Darren. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. A 16-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of Leanne Gordon, who was shot dead in East London on Tuesday evening. The boy has also been charged with the attempted murder of a 20-year-old man and a 16-year-old boy. He was also charged with possession of a firearm and possession with intent to supply Class A drugs. He will appear at Barkingside Magistrates Court on Monday. Met Police have arrested 2 protesters at a pro-Palestine march in London today. Thousands of people gathered to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. The Met Police arrested a man on suspicion of racially aggravated public order offence for allegedly displaying a placard comparing Israel to Nazi Germany. A second man was arrested for carrying an offensive placard. UN officials say there's enough food aid available in Egypt and Jordan to reach 1 million people in Gaza, amid fears of a humanitarian aid collapsing. Under a new system, supplies could come to the Kerem Shalom crossing on the border between Israel, Gaza and Egypt for the first time. The UN says trucks need to be allowed to enter Gaza directly to alleviate an increasingly desperate situation in the enclave. Israel has so far rebuffed pleas from the United Nations to access the crossing. Deputy Executive Director of the World Food Programme, Carl Scow, says the operation is critical.
We need Kerem Shalom to open. Yesterday I think we were trying to use Kerem Shalom for the first time for verification, but not for entry. We need that also so that we can have more order around the UN convoys coming in and to some degree separate them from the rest of the aid that is flowing in through Rafah. And of course we need a humanitarian ceasefire so that there is the space and the operational environment inside to deliver to all those that need it and in a controlled and orderly way.
Court documents reveal the late Queen wanted protection for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex after they abstained from royal duties. An extract from a letter written by the late Queen's private secretary, Sir Edward Young, states it is imperative that the family continues to be provided with effective security. In a statement, Prince Harry said he feared for his family's safety and felt forced to leave the UK. He is suing Associated Newspapers Limited over an article about his legal challenge against the Home Office, following a decision to change his security arrangements. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to the Saturday 5.
It's Saturday night and you're with the Saturday 5. I'm Darren Grimes and I can promise that you're in for a very lively hour. Let's crack on with tonight's first debate. First up, it's Albie. Albie, what are you kicking things off with tonight?
Darren, I've got something new for you this week. Praise for Suella Braverman. Now, look, my views on Suella Braverman are very well known. Whilst I don't think she was the best Home Secretary and that she got a lot of stuff wrong during her time in government, I do think she got one thing right, and that was in her debate in Westminster earlier on this week. Let's take a listen.
Tens of thousands of mostly young men, many with values and social mores at odds with our own, pouring into our country, day after day, month after month, year after year.
Is right. Suella is right to say that there are many migrants crossing the Channel who might not share British values. I heard an account from a woman working at an organisation helping Channel migrants at hotels across the country, where she said at the hotels she's working at, they've had to move women out of mixed accommodation because of the way the male migrants were treating women. We need to have a conversation about the average opinions of people from countries where a lot of these Channel migrants are coming from. According to research from the Pew Research Centre, the majority of Muslims from countries in South Asia, North Africa and the Middle East believe that sons and daughters shouldn't have equal inheritance rights, that they want Sharia law to be the law of their country, that women must obey their husbands, and that Western popular culture is a threat to morality. Now, the majority of the countries where Channel migrants are crossing from fall into the polling categories of the Pew Research Centre's data. We need to have a conversation about this. It's not an easy topic to talk about, but it's an important topic to talk about nonetheless. And moreover, why is it left to Conservatives like Suella Braverman to talk about this issue? Why aren't the left interested in this issue at all? Is it not reasonable to think that people who are coming from countries where gay people are killed, where women are expected to obey men, might be a threat to gay British people and women? I think they could be. Is it not reasonable that you would think the left wouldn't want to have unlimited and uncontrolled migration from parts of the world where the average citizen has values so completely at odds with their own? And not just left-wing values, opposition to British values like fairness, democracy, liberty, freedom, tolerance. It's not racist to have a conversation about the values of people moving to this country. And it's time we had that conversation. Benjamin, I was absolutely horrified when I was doing the research for this part of the show at some of the opinions that people hold in some of the countries where people are crossing the channel from. Now, of course, some of the people crossing the channel might be coming to this country because of those opinions. But are you not concerned about what we might be bringing into this country from abroad?
I think, in truth, it's complicated because you talked about how they might not share values of liberty and freedom. Well, I dare say those values are the very reason that they've escaped, because they are basic fundamentals to a free human life, and that's why they want to be in Britain and not Yemen or Afghanistan or a country like that. The idea that they're more likely to misogynistic is probably an understatement. You know, to hate women, to disrespect them, to hate gay people is obviously plausible. But at the same time, you know, there have been generations of migrants who have had those views. There have been generations of Britain who've had those views, and they've changed their views when they assimilated. You know, many people who came up from predominantly black parts of the Commonwealth who moved here in the 50s and 60s would have had very similar social attitudes as well. And would you say, as someone from that background, that they shouldn't have come? Because that's kind of where this leads to.
But what I would say about...
What would you think about that? Because they would have similar views.
I am literally about to address that point. What I would say about Commonwealth migrants who came here in the 1950s and the societal attitudes towards women and gay people in those countries, given that they were literally just British colonies, were probably actually quite similar to the societal attitudes that we had in Britain. Look, we were all pretty racist, misogynistic and homophobic in the 1950s. Britain isn't anymore. A lot of these countries that migrants are coming from still are. So I think that is where my concern would come. Darren, how do you feel about this? I know you're very passionate about stopping the boats, illegal migration. Do you think it's a bit strange that left-wingers don't really seem to care that people are coming from countries where there are values completely different to their own?
Yes, I mean, I, on this very channel, had a debate with a Nigerian guy who'd come over, and he said openly that actually he doesn't mind if more Nigerians come over and they do hold views that run contrary to what is British legislation. So being anti-gay, being anti-whatever it might be, that's absolutely fine. And I said, who have you actually asked? You know, who have you said to the British people, have you polled them? Have you said, would you be absolutely supremely relaxed about people coming here who don't share your views and values? Because that's what I find deeply, morally reprehensible, because you're bringing over a load of people who simply won't assimilate into wider British society because they don't agree with wider British society. So the likes of Owen Jones, you know, parroting on about Gaza every 2 minutes, well, you wouldn't last 2 minutes over there. So all of these things, I think, call into question the morality, frankly, of the left and the fact that they don't care about minority groups in reality. They care about the fact that the left-wing project has been one that supports mass migration, and they can't deviate from that narrative.
Belinda, as a woman, do you feel...
What?
Sorry, I just assumed your gender.
How very dare you? I'm a lady.
Yes, you are a lady, a real lady. But Belinda, as a real lady,
yes.
Just for a second to be serious, do you feel any less safe as a result of the increase in channel migrants that we have been seeing in this country? I think it was about 81,000 this year, up from 81,000 asylum seeker applications this year, and there are 17,000 asylum seeker applications, I believe, in 2010.
Well, look, I think immigration has worked so well in the past because it's been done at a pace that even if it's from countries with very different values from us, they've come in small enough numbers and in a slow enough time that they've been able to integrate because the town or village they've gone into is still majority British-held values. Unfortunately, now what we see is so many coming over such a small amount of time, often going to places where they're already in the majority, that there's no onus on them to integrate anymore. anymore or to assimilate anymore. For women in those areas, and I've had many occasions that I haven't spoken about before or haven't mentioned where I've been in a situation I felt a little bit more harassed and threatened. I have called the police in the past. Many, I mean, actually, I've got a long list, but occasions, once, for example, where a Somali man was following me, wouldn't leave me alone, and spoke very little English, but was shouting at me, woman, woman, you need to come teach me English, stay here, stop, and following me, you have to teach me English. I had to hide into a fabric shop of a lovely Asian lady who gave me protection and actually sent her husband out to check on the street after. So it's not about immigrants per se, because many have assimilated, many love our British culture, and in fact, through Brexit, my experience is that many first, second generation immigrants are more patriotic about this country than the whole of Westminster put together. So it's not about being scared of immigrants, it's actually about, as you put so well, being more conditional about immigration. If we're having vast numbers coming over, is it wise to have them coming from cultures that once they're here and have the vote, they can start actually voting against the progress women have made, against the progress the gay community have made, because their vote will be just as much as mine is worth, and the government won't put in proper integration policies.
Belinda, thanks so much for sharing that story. It must have been difficult. Poppy, listening to what Belinda has said, have you been through something similar?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the young women in this country have experienced some kind of, particularly if they do move to London and maybe they come from somewhere outside London where there's been less immigration.
So you think there's more sexual harassment in London than outside of London?
Certainly from what I've experienced. You know, I grew up in Essex, which is like not particularly far away from London. But in the last year alone, I've been harassed on public transport, the tube, I think 4 times, and I've had 4 separate police incidents. But it comes down to, we have to be realistic about why people do actually come to Britain. And Benjamin, you said earlier that people have a respect for liberal values and the freedoms that can come from living in Britain.
They come here for the freedom.
That's not true.
Well, it is true. They come here so they're not beaten and abused and in a war zone.
The vast majority of people who are coming to Britain at the moment are, through our legal migration schemes, are coming for economic reasons. Yeah. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying this is a pejorative. I'm just saying you have to be realistic. But we were talking about the countries with very different cultures. People who are coming from countries with very different cultures have no real reason to want to integrate. And why would they? If you're coming here because you have better economic opportunities, you are not coming here because you have respect for the British rule of law. That is quite separate. That is quite separate.
I would question that, because my grandparents came here for economic reasons, and I can tell you they have respect for the British rule of law and the way of life, and they've integrated. So there's no reason to say that immigrants today wouldn't have that same way of living.
If you are, you know, for example, as we're trying now, the most radical experiment in mass migration ever in history. I mean, to have over 1 million people coming in every year from all over the world, put into communities, many of which are already, you know, made up of many, many migrant groups. The idea that you can then integrate these people, I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start. As a government, what would you even do?
Yeah, well, right, we're going to find more out from you, Poppy, because up next it is indeed Poppy. Poppy, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, I think the big story this week is, unfortunately, it's the farce of the COVID inquiry that's being led by Baroness Houghton. And Boris Johnson has kind of been the focus of this at the moment. And I found it to be really, really distasteful watching the former Prime Minister essentially be harangued for his role in his culpability in the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it got me thinking, what is this inquiry actually about? Because if you look to continental Europe, almost every country has had an inquiry into how their nation responded to this unprecedented pandemic. They've already been wrapped up. Ours has barely even begun. We have victim groups, we have lawyers, a lot of people starting to make a lot of money out of this. And it comes down to the fundamental problem, which is, are we actually learning any lessons from this? Or are we pointing the finger at politicians, particularly Conservative politicians that certain people may not like, and blaming them for something that they may not have any personal responsibility in doing? So for me, I find it very, very frustrating that this is a wasted opportunity. It's wasting a lot of money, it's wasting a lot of people's times, and it's also, I think, disrespectful to the victim groups. So, as you can tell, I've got quite a few opinions on this one.
Absolutely. I mean, what is it that has annoyed you the most about this? Is it the fact that basically I think we focus more on Boris Johnson's WhatsApps, or lack thereof, and not enough on the fact that if we compare ourselves with Sweden, for example, right, that there was a perfectly different response.
Well, Darren, if another pandemic, you know, does occur, and goodness knows, it might even occur while the inquiry is still going on. It could be going for many, many, many years. You know, what lessons are we actually learning from this? I mean, some of the data that's being thrown out is incorrect. It seems much more to me that this is a finger-pointing exercise than a constructive inquiry where we will learn lessons. So if something like this, heaven forbid, happens again, we'll know what to do better. That's what's irritating to me.
And what I've noticed is that the scientists who, you know, at the start of the pandemic said we shouldn't wear masks, who then changed and said we should wear masks, are now trying to cover their own, well, behinds. And say that actually, you know, it's the politicians' fault.
Right.
They're the ones that were
They
calling
did that with the
for all these
vaccine
people.
as well. Remember, the children won't need the vaccine. Oh, yes, they will need the vaccine. I mean, it's so... That's what the questions... The questions are all wrong that's being asked at the moment.
So you agree with Poppy then?
I agree with Poppy. I think it's such a waste of money. I think there are no hard questions about how can we avoid lockdown and who's to blame for the harder, faster, longer, you know, more torturous lockdowns as a lazy quick fix to a panic. I mean, that's what I feel, that nothing's going to come out of this. It's going to cost us millions. It's going to take ages. And really, it's about personalities, ego, and it is Boris bashing. Bearing in mind, he did nearly die. So the idea the man was frivolous about everyone's lives. And he didn't kill anyone. COVID killed people. And although my heart goes out very much, obviously, those who lost them, Boris didn't kill anyone, but he's being treated like a murderer.
We all look to Benjamin.
I mean, first of all, the terms of the inquiry were set by Boris Johnson. That moment was made clear when he made a suggestion saying, I don't think this inquiry is quite right, he said at the end of his testimony, to which the person questioning him said, well, you set the terms of the inquiry, so maybe you should have thought about that at the time. Classically, he didn't know what he was doing. I think these inquiries are so important because clearly it cost, you know, tens, hundreds of billions of pounds. It was the biggest shock that we've had culturally and economically since Second World War. And the idea that you wouldn't go over every last detail would be a mistake in a democracy. And I think the fact 5,000 WhatsApps have gone missing and he can't explain why, he really can't. The factory reset thing is obviously nonsense. I say we need a factory reset on Boris Johnson and the Tories, not on these WhatsApps. The fact is that, you know, when someone is trying to lie about the decision-making and the thought process, that should be a real concern. And this has been exposed by the inquiry, and that's already very useful.
But I just feel like there's so much focus on Boris Johnson when actually the failure is so much bigger than just Boris Johnson. The whole Whitehall machine was completely unable to deal with what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. The preparedness that we'd done before, that we've been working on for decades, by the way, under Labour and Conservative governments, was clearly not good enough. And all of this focus on one person and whether he does or doesn't apologise is unhelpful, in my opinion. All I care about is that there are lessons that are learned. I agree that the inquiry is important, Ben, but I think the focuses that have been on the inquiry at the moment, whether or not Boris has apologised, whether or not Rishi said let the bodies pile high, might sound harsh, but I don't care about any of that. All I care about is that lessons are learnt from this and that it never happens again.
And also, can we talk about more broadly, I think this is important. This inquiry, yes, as you said, there needs to be some discussion about how policymakers responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was unprecedented, I completely agree. But if that's the case, why is it true that since 1997 there have been an average of 3 inquiries running at any given time every year? I mean, we have these inquiries for everything now.
Why have the Conservatives carried on with it, Poppy, then?
Well, I certainly don't agree with the process.
You know, it's not just a Labour problem.
No, but it's not just a Labour problem. I completely agree with you. It's a cross-partisan issue. We now need to reckon with, when something goes wrong, how do we respond to it? What will the lessons be learned? Or are we just lining the pockets of lawyers?
And they always go on about a judge-led inquiry, and I think, God, judge-led, he must be exhausted. But, you know, I think in a democracy it is much better to have these things exposed in the public sphere. The problem is that maybe we have a media and an attitude to politicians that is more interested in the soap opera than the details, and that ends up with some of these things being kind of redundant. And, you know, the hours of Boris Johnson's questioning, I dare say the bits that most of us would have picked up on from the reports are more likely to be the soap opera because that's what the journalist goes for the headline.
Yeah, but I just still can't understand why you care so much about seeing Boris Johnson's WhatsApps.
Well, because that is the process in which this government was making decisions that caused people to live or die, to have basic freedoms at certain times and not at others. You know, it sounds like the whole system was a mess in there. And if there's nothing to hide in those WhatsApps, then why are they being hidden?
It's like
that says to me that there's something important about his thought process.
What, Carrie put the tea on?
Oh, there's obviously going to be more than just Carrie put the tea on. You know, I know from my dealings with... I know from my dealings with a lot of...
I just don't want to trawl through 40,000...
No, but you don't have to. You don't have to. The inquiry will. And I think it's slightly almost like that Rebecca Vardy, that whole situation where the PR dropped her phone in the North Sea. You know, it's all that same kind of energy. It's all quite shady, and I don't like it.
OK, well, still to come tonight, we're going to find out what Belinda thinks about male stoicism. And we're going to find out what I think about ruining my generation's home-buying plans and take a wild guess as to who Benjamin thinks should pay for Harry and Meghan's security. You're with the Saturday 5 live on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back to the Saturday 5. As always, cheers very much for your emails about tonight's topics. So, we've had a fair few of you write in, and, well, Anne, to start us off, says, we do not know COVID measures were a failure as there is no comparison. Saintly Sweden isn't making a success of migration and other issues, for example. So, well, that's one view. A few others are agreeing with Albie, actually, quite a few of them, saying that actually on Suella Braverman is absolutely right, but that they're disappointed we didn't mention the grooming gang scandal, for example, as an obvious piece of evidence to suggest that there's been a massive failure of integration and all of those other things.
And how also girls and women feel less likely to come forward if they're going to be accused of being racist.
Indeed, yeah, absolutely. And then Julie wrote in and said that she agrees with Poppy and that she suffered sexual harassment from what she deems to be a migrant, and that actually she's deeply worried about the direction that we're going in. But folks, it's time for our next debate. Keep your emails coming in.
Now then, Darren, I hear for a change, immigration's on your mind.
Indeed. Right, so I'm going to take you back to last year to start off with. Last year, England only managed to scrape together 177,000 new homes. Now, let's add a little bit of spice to those numbers, shall we? Because Britain's been on quite the immigration bender and is now suffering one hell of a hangover, with net migration soaring to a record 745,000 in 2022 and 672,000 in 2023. Now, I'm not Carol Vorderman, right? I cannot crunch numbers and I certainly cannot afford the Botox bill. But even I can see that there's a colossal gap between the trickle of housing supply and the tsunami of migrant demand. We've got youngsters in our families eyeing up their first home. Now, they're likely singing hymns of open borders and all that malarkey, but I say it's time for a bloody reality check. Britain wasn't always as open as a Prince Harry memoir. This mass migration business, it's a recent fad. And here's a bit of wisdom for yous. If you're importing a Manchester-sized crowd yearly, well, guess what? You're going to need to start building extra Manchesters every year, right? Consider London, where half of the social housing is filled by those not born on this fair isle. For the comfy crowd, detached from migration's front lines, it's easy to ignore. But what about a single mother hunting for a roof over her kids' heads? Do we just say, well, tough luck, pet, you're queuing behind our diversity drive? Professor Matt Goodwin received quite the kicking this week, and he notes that the Migration Advisory Committee found in 2018 that a 1% rise in population from migration pushes up housing prices by the same margin. And it's not just buying, of course. If the cost of housing goes up, then renting becomes a nightmare too. And it's the young ones who are up against it. The fix, in my eyes, is that we need an immigration freeze. We need more house building, yes, but we also need policies that refuse to send Brits to the back of an ever-growing queue. It shouldn't be controversial to say that. It's common sense. In order to unite Britain, we've got to put a full stop to Britain's mass migration madness. Now, Poppy, you had a really, really good piece for The Telegraph recently. I forget when it was, the other week.
Would have been about a week ago. Yeah.
And it was very good, and I listened to it intently. Now, you, for saying that, by your generation, will have been accused of being some kind of swivel-eyed fruitcake. Are you getting sick of the fact that, you know, we hear people like Benjamin Butterworth talk about how we need to build more housing, whilst at the same time he supports, you know, it's not busloads, it's shiploads coming into this country every year?
Well, I completely agree. The problem with the language around the mass migration debate is it often sees house building and massive immigration as two things that are totally separate from each other. But as you've said, you know, in an ideal world, particularly the world that a lot of very liberal economists will make, well, you know, if we're having 1 million people coming in every year gross, then we can just build 1 million houses. But the problem is in this country, as we know, and I'm sure as you will agree, Benjamin, it's really bloody difficult to build houses. It's very difficult. We have a lot of legislation in place. We have the 1945 Town and County Planning Act, which makes it very, very difficult for the government to actually intervene and do a top-down scheme of building lots of houses. And that's irregardless of the fact that a lot of voters aren't happy to have house building going on near them. So you've got that one aspect. And then you've got the second aspect. And we're told constantly that immigration is good for the economy. It's good for the economy. Don't listen to the fact that productivity's flatlined for the last 15 years. It is good for the economy. We're going to keep saying it until it happens. Well, of course, immigration is going to drive up the cost of housing. I mean, we know that. That's basic supply and demand. And so I think it's very important, particularly for people of my generation, to understand that one of the reasons why you cannot get a foot on the housing ladder, I'm sorry, it's not the nasty Tory government. Well, maybe it is a little bit, but it's not what you think it is. It's not corporate greed. It's immigration. There is a relationship between these two things. And until we can have an honest conversation about what that relationship entails for my generation, well, then, you know, we're just going to talk ourselves in circles.
Benjamin?
I mean, when you've got 750,000 people, as it was estimated last year, I think it would be, intellectually redundant to say that that's not going to have an effect. Now, many of those people actually tend to live in not great conditions, frankly, and have many people in one home, so I suspect it's not quite so dramatic as you might fear. But the truth is, the fundamental issue here is that we've built half as many homes in the last 40 years as France has. So we have an issue here that goes back before the kind of immigration levels that we have, and that has been brewing for about 30 years as a problem. And at the same time, you've seen the number of people buying second and third homes, not necessarily to rent, but as, places to go on holiday in the UK, that has gone up 800% in the last 10 years. And so when you talk about housing crisis, you can't pretend that's not there. 15% of all houses in this country are rented. That's an enormous proportion, and that's people buying up lots of houses. When you're talking about supply and demand, that is having a profound effect on the cost. And full disclosure, my grandparents were buy-to-let landlords, so, that affects the economy. But now so many people do it that is causing a problem. We're 4 million homes short. And the fact is, I think there are a lot of people that would like to say that it's, the immigrants, full stop, that are causing this, who also sit there going to the local council meetings complaining about their view of the park or the golf course when they don't want new houses built. Lots of people in this country live in entire cities and towns that were built in the 50s, the 60s, and have nice lives there, that also go on and oppose anything remotely like that being built today.
But
That's
even if people like your grandparents, for example, had said, look, I'll let you build 4 million homes, let's have them all near me, right? We've got a crisis here, let's do it. Next year, we're going to have another 700,000 people come here, and then we'll be back to square one because of the kind of policies that you Liberals support.
But isn't it good now that we're at least admitting that there is a relationship between the two, right?
Oh, that took us long enough. I mean,
but this
not
is
rocket
really
science.
This is what the conversation comes down to. It's about there is a relationship between the two. You don't live in an ideal world where you can have one or the other. You've got to address both. I agree. Let's liberalise house building, but at the same time, we've got to make sure that we can deal with the backlog.
I think when we talk
can't
about
be adding more.
When we talk about immigration and housing, look, of course, I agree with Benjamin and Darren in that, of course, if we're going to be having 750,000 people coming into a year, that's going to have an impact on housing demand. But even if we had an immigration freeze tomorrow, Darren, which I don't agree with, but let's say we had an immigration freeze tomorrow, there would still be a housing crisis in this country. So let's not pretend that just an immigration freeze alone is going to solve the housing crisis in this country. It is not. And actually, it is also true that if we are going to build the numbers of houses that we need in this country in the time that we want them all built, 500,000 a year, we might actually need some migrant labour for a limited time to come over and build those houses. So I think an immigration freeze would be bonkers, by the way. I think immigration should come down, because I think 750,000 in 1 year is bonkers. But a total immigration freeze would be bonkers, because there are skills that we need in this country that we don't have in the native population.
Which is that a lot of investment in house building, especially in a city like London, comes from businesses in the Arab world, and a lot of the people building houses in this country come from Eastern Europe. So the idea that there's not two sides of this which involve immigration would be ridiculous.
I don't want our green and pleasant land to be concreted over because of immigration. No, but I'm just saying, if it continues, the idea that, we'll just build more and more houses. We're not talking about mini Oxfords and beautiful Bath Crescents that are going to be built up and down the country. That's not going to happen. I'm sorry, but I think the idea of immigration now has completely been stolen from us via the ballot box. It's like we can't vote on it anymore. It's been taken away from us. And I don't think it's the immigrants' fault at all. I mean, they have been welcomed and encouraged to come here by the government. So anyone who has frustration over housing, direct your anger at the government, not about those coming into your community where housing's concerned, because they've been encouraged to come here. And it's been reckless of the government to encourage so many to come here when we do not have the infrastructure to house our own, especially in council housing. It's a betrayal of the British people.
At all.
No, but it's not about having none at all. I think we should have a pause on the numbers down to tens of thousands. I want to build some houses for those people already here, not for people coming abroad. No.
Right, we're going to get on to more topics now, but still ahead, Benjamin's going to solve the mystery of who's to pay for the Duke and Duchess of Woke's security, and Belinda will explain why we should celebrate the British stiff upper lip. You're with the Saturday 5 live on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Saturday Five. As always, cheers very much for your emails. Back to our COVID inquiry chat earlier, Anne has written in and she says, Boris never wanted lockdown from day one, but Cabinet did. That is democracy. Neil says, look at the state of Sweden's crime because of mass migration. Watch out, UK of increased crime. Yeah, I think that's an important point. It's lawless hellhole. Steve says, it's all down to the government allowing this to happen. It's not complicated. Stop them coming. Right. That's well said. Now, it's time for our next debate. We're going to talk about Harry and Meghan, who are, of course, universally unloved by the British people. So who better to defend the pair than Benjamin Butterworth? Take it away, Benjamin.
To be universally loathed, naturally I'm on their side. This week, documents released from the late Queen showed that she believed Harry and Meghan should have their state-funded security carry on. It's in contrast to a lot of what we've been hearing. Elizabeth II, or Elizabeth the Great, as I think we should be calling her, said that it was of quote-unquote paramount importance that the security continue for Harry and Meghan because there were extremists out there, was her word, I'd use the word nutters, who were going after them. Now, after years of hating on the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, the relentless attacks that this poor couple has faced, I think it's time that we heed the late Queen's words. I mean, after all, it is just nasty to remove the protection of this family. Prince Harry didn't ask to be born into the royal family. He didn't ask to be one of the most famous people in the world, and he can't stop that is already the case. He didn't ask to go and serve in Afghanistan. He chose to do that and put his life on the line with other British soldiers. Now, I think we should respect veterans, and that includes Prince Harry. So the idea that we as a country would be so small-minded and so venomous as to say that because we don't like some of the politics and cultural persuasions of Harry and Meghan, that they should remove the security that keeps them alive, bearing in mind that his mother was killed in a horrendous accident. Not only is that wrong, but it wasn't the wishes of the late Queen. So God forbid, if we saw something happen to Harry, Meghan or their kids, people would change their mind then. So why don't we change our mind now? Darren, you relentlessly hate them. Why shouldn't they have the taxpayers cover their security, given that they didn't ask to be in this position?
Well, you keep saying that. They didn't ask for all of this. They didn't ask blah, 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 and whatever else you said. But I'm afraid that actually no one asked Prince Harry to admit to how many people he'd killed whilst on tour in Afghanistan, right? We didn't ask him to write a tell-all memoir that put people at risk who he then exploited to make a quick buck off of the back of his book. So you might think that all of that is perfectly fine and excusable, but I certainly don't.
I think that is largely irrelevant.
How is it irrelevant?
If none of those things
You
had
mentioned
happened,
it as a security risk.
None of those things had happened when this letter from the Queen's private secretary was written, and he was already at serious risk. And the fact is that he cannot get rid of that. So one of the reasons why he's had to do things like write the book is because of the enormous financial cost of covering his security.
And he got, what, tens of millions out of Diana's his inheritance from Diana. And then, of course, he still gets money from being the Prince of Wales, former Prince of Wales.
Well, let me put this back to you.
He can afford his own security.
Should Boris Johnson get security?
Well, Boris Johnson doesn't get the kind of security that Prince Harry was
Johnson
getting.
Gets round-the-clock securities. Former Prime Ministers do.
Yes.
So do former Home Secretaries, so do former Northern Ireland Secretaries up to a point. That costs a lot of money. Do you think they should lose
Boris
it?
Johnson hasn't turned around and said, sod this, I'm off to live in California.
The guy earns millions of pounds in his private pocket and doesn't do anything of public service at this point in time. So your argument is flawed.
No, it's not. Boris Johnson will pay for his security apparatus when he's abroad and needs to broaden it.
So will Harry and Meghan.
Yeah, indeed.
That's not the question. The question is that they get protection in this country when they're here. I think that's nasty.
Right. We're missing an important detail, because Harry and Meghan offered to pay for the Home Office security that they would receive in the United Kingdom when they were in the country. And the issue was that people didn't think they would be entitled, they shouldn't be entitled, now that they're not royals, to the same style of Home Office security that the rest of the royal family have. Now, I think that's totally spiteful. I do, for what it's worth, think that they should have the same security that the other royals get in the United Kingdom when they are here. If they've offered to pay for it themselves, we should let them do it.
So you think our Home Office security is up for rent?
For a royal, yes, I do.
They're not working royals. And I actually agree with you a little bit, Benjamin.
They are inescapably
I do think we should lay off the couple. They're just human. There is too much hate against them. I personally feel nothing towards them. They've just been a disappointment. But other than that, nothing. But I think it's wrong to allow our home security to be rented out by a couple of Hollywood celebs if they're no longer working royals.
If Harry was shot in the street, imagine the horror, rightly, and we
then
have
he should
to
pay
do
for his
the
own, but not Home Office
stop
security.
that.
Which he would have security. But still ahead, last but not least, it's Belinda who will be responding to our very own Nigel Farage's emotional reunion with his daughter last night.
Oh, what a shock.
I know. Are you surprised?
Very.
Oh.
Didn't expect this at all.
You're with the Saturday 5 live on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back to the Saturday 5. Now, folks, before we move on, I just want to give you a small reminder about our very own Nigel Farage, who's in the jungle. Nigel got through another round on I'm a Celebrity last night, and he's in the final 4. So if you want to vote for him, grab your phone, scan the QR code, which is on screen now, and download the app. That app enables you to vote for him 5 times per day for free. So let's make him king of the jungle. It's going to be the biggest upset since Brexit, and personally, I can't wait to see Benjamin in floods of tears. Now, Britain's often criticised for having a stiff upper lip, is it not? A keep calm and carry on attitude. But our very own Belinda de Lucy says that ain't no bad thing. Take it away, Belinda.
Nigel Farage had a moving moment last night when he saw his daughter for the first time in 3 weeks on I'm a Celebrity. Get me out of here. Take a look.
Hello. I don't believe it. How are you, love? You all right? What's it?
Just happy to see you.
Oh, happy to see you, darling. Yeah, and you?
Yeah. Okay, let's sit down. Oh.
Wow, what a shot.
I know. Are you surprised?
Very.
Oh.
Didn't expect this at all.
How have you been? How is it?
Good.
Yeah?
I like the sleeping out. That's
yeah.
nice.
Dad, you've done so well. We're all so proud of you. It's been so refreshing to just see you as you for once. Everyone at home is amazed, like shocked, but in the best way.
How's everybody?
Everyone's good. Everyone sends their love. Grandma and Grandpa, they watch it every night. They loved seeing your bare bottom on the telly.
Now, his reaction to seeing his daughter triggered the woke brigade into a frenzy, all because he didn't unravel into an emotional lather or flip around like an emotionally incontinent, hypersensitive, BBC-approved man when he saw her. Many on Twitter responded in horror to his calm and reserved reaction, saying, oh, it was a sign this man was obviously a sociopath. He couldn't be less arsed to see his child, and that he was cold and without feeling. No, he wasn't. He has, like many millions of Brits, a stiff upper lip, much needed in moments when those vulnerable around you need strength. He was an anchor for his daughter to hold on to when she was visibly upset. That seems pretty fatherly to me. Imagine if he had puddled into a bawling child at the sight of her and left her feeling worried. No, stiff upper lip is often an act of great selflessness. It can save lives, give reassurance to those in fear, win wars, protect the weak, and provide sanctuary for those more vulnerable to unravel to. It could help in this current climate where the fixation with navel-gazing on every offence or discomfort causes more harm than good. There needs to be a rebalance, so we should cheer those who show resilience, strength and good coping mechanisms alongside those who want to protect men's mental health. Our young need it more than ever now. And I think I speak for many women when I say that we feel safer being with steady ships over the woke, hyper-emotional, unravelling types like Prince Harry, especially in times we are pregnant or we have an intruder in the house. I speak from experience there, by the way. It is time to applaud the British character of the stiff upper lip that has helped forge a small island into one of the superpowers the world sees today. Bring it back and let's celebrate it.
Benjamin.
I mean,
Benjamin.
I don't agree. I mean, I just thought, look, I'm not questioning that he's a good father because you could see the love between the two, and so that was rather nice to see. But there was another moment in that episode where Sam Thompson, the sort of made in Chelsea YouTuber guy, saw his best mate and cried and hugged, and those two men told each other they love each other. And I thought how fantastic to see, you know, straight men behaving like that, so comfortable with their own emotions. That was what I admired. You know, that is a modern man, someone who is able to communicate their love.
But can't you?
And I think there are too many emotionally constipated men in this country for whom they get torn apart inside because they can't level with other people.
But Ben, isn't there space for both types of men? God, if every single man was an emotional wreck all the time... No, I'm sorry, we would get nowhere in life. I'd feel really insecure as a country if they'd unravel at the slightest offence.
I actually thought Nigel seemed quite emotional in that interaction.
Well, for Nigel, he was.
Actually,
but
he wiped away a tear. I thought he was genuinely quite emotional.
The idea you have to do this kind of mawkish, overwrought mentality, I think it's just awful.
You can if you like, but
you can,
he doesn't do it that way.
In future, it's fine, but I feel now we've gone too far in the opposite direction, and there's a social pressure now to be seen as like being in touch with your emotions, I just think it's, you know, it can be ridiculous sometimes.
But I think a lot of men of that age, you know, have really struggled with connecting with their family because they don't have the vocabulary, the emotional experience.
Well, I haven't had that from my father, who's very similar to that. He doesn't say he loves me in words, but he does it in actions, and I think that's far more important than emotional hysteria.
We'll have to leave it there, but vote Farage. And thanks for joining us tonight. Next up, it's the brilliant Leo Curse with the Saturday Night Showdown. Cheers for watching, and we'll see you again next week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. It's a very unsettled picture over the next couple of days with low pressure very much in charge of our weather. The first system brought plenty of wet and windy weather named Storm Ellen by the Irish Met Service, with Storm Fergus sat out to the west, bringing further wet weather through Sunday. Back to Saturday evening, though, and a drier picture across parts of England and Wales as that band of rain has pushed its way into northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland as well, where that heavy rain continues to fall on some very saturated ground. So some flooding is possible here. Under those clear skies, though, further south, we could see temperatures around 6 or 7 degrees, but perhaps just a little cooler across parts of Scotland. So a cloudy start across Scotland, but some sunny skies to begin with across England and Wales before the next system pushes in from the west, bringing some further spells of heavy rain and some strong winds too. Those strongest winds along those Irish Sea coast through Sunday afternoon and evening, but that rain continues to push its way north and eastwards into parts of Scotland through Sunday afternoon. Temperatures here generally around average, but a little milder again across the southwest, around 13 or 14 degrees. It's a cloudy start to Monday for most of us, with outbreaks of light rain and drizzle at times, but some heavier rain across parts of Scotland, pushing in from the east as we go through into Monday afternoon. The best of the sunshine, though, again across Wales and parts of England, where we could see some sunny skies through the afternoon. Temperatures generally around average for the time of year, and there's some hints of something a little bit more settled on the way through next week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, coming up on the Saturday Night Showdown. The medieval tradition of duelling returned to the streets of London this week, but with ladders. Whig or woman, an MP is forced to apologise for misgendering one of her election rivals. And Doctor Who or Dr Woke, the BBC spark a row over the new casting of Isaac Newton. And a DJ is forced to apologise to 7,000 people for playing Wham. Discussing all this and much more, my brilliant panel. Joining me tonight are comedians Cressida Wetton, Paul Cox and Darius Davies. But first, let's get your latest news headlines from Sophia.
Good evening, I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. A 16-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of Leanne Gordon, who was shot dead in East London on Tuesday evening. The boy has also been charged with the attempted murder of a 20-year-old man and a 16-year-old boy. He was also charged with possession of a firearm and possession with intent to supply Class A drugs. He will appear at Barkingside Magistrates Court on Monday. Met Police have arrested 2 protesters at a pro-Palestine march in London today and are appealing for the public's help to identify a woman. It's part of an investigation into a placard carried at the protest earlier today. The Met Police released an image on social media and have appealed for the woman to come forward. Thousands of people gathered to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. The Met Police arrested a man on suspicion of a racially aggravated public order offence for allegedly displaying a placard comparing Israel to Nazi Germany. A second man was arrested for carrying an offensive placard. UN officials say there's enough food aid available in Egypt and Jordan to reach 1 million people in Gaza amid fears of humanitarian aid collapsing. Under a new system, supplies could come to the Kerem Shalom crossing on the border between Israel, Gaza and Egypt for the first time. The UN says trucks need to be allowed to enter Gaza directly to alleviate an increasingly desperate situation in the enclave. Israel has so far rebuffed pleas from the United Nations to access the crossing. Deputy Executive Director of the World Food Programme, Carl Scow, says the operation is critical.
We need Kerem Shalom to open. Yesterday I think we were trying to use Kerem Shalom for the first time for verification, but not for entry. We need that also so that we can have more order around the UN convoys coming in and to some degree separate them from the rest of the aid that is flowing in through Rafah. And of course, we need a humanitarian ceasefire so that there is the space and the operational environment inside to deliver to all those that need it and in a controlled and orderly way.
And 5 coastal homes in an erosion-hit seaside community are being torn down today. Demolition work began on the clifftop homes in the village of Hemsby in Norfolk this morning. Great Yarmouth Borough Council said the decision was taken because the homes were not structurally sound and are unsafe after high tides and strong winds have been eroding the cliff. The feeling locally has been fluctuating from extreme sadness to extreme anger. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News.
Thank you, Sophia. The medieval tradition of duelling returned to the streets of London this week, but not with flintlock pistols. This was with ladders, and not over the honour of some fair maiden, but over the flag flying above this land. What is the flag of England? You'd be forgiven for thinking it's this one, as you see it so often, but it's not. It's this one. You can tell it's this one because this is the one mocked by self-loathing leftists. Here's the clip. Honestly, give this Englishman a medal. He's pulling down a flag that makes many of my Jewish friends feel unsafe as they've seen people wearing it chant for their extermination. And the man who pulled the ladder down could have killed him. He should be put on the naughty step. However, this is Sadiq Khan's London and his police force have a 2-tier approach. So I'm fully expecting the Englishman to get 30 years in jail and the 2 hooligans who attacked him to get hired as hate crime advisors for the Met Police. But why are these Palestinian flags flying in London in the first place? There are hundreds in Tower Hamlets alone. The council say they had no involvement with these flags being placed in the borough. Really? Why don't they pull them down then? The flags are blocking lights and signs and they embolden anti-Semitism. But then, anti-Semitism is the norm for some leftists now. Just this week, we've seen the presidents of elite universities, Harvard, Penn and MIT, make excuses for students who call for the extermination of Jews. And we've seen the blue-haired, non-binary staff at a coffee shop in California stop a Jewish woman from entering the bathroom. The coffee shop is pledged to send staff on diversity training. I'm sure that'll solve the problem. If only someone had sent Hitler on a 2-hour diversity awareness course. Think of the tragedy that could have been prevented. It's so weird to see the people who'd call you a Nazi for misgendering them blithely calling for genocide like they're at a Nazi rally in 1939. It's become a social media trend for these people. Anti-Semitism is this year's Ice Bucket Challenge, apparently. And people who were silent while Hamas raped and killed civilians on October the 7th are crying fascism and genocide because the Israeli military is detaining suspects. Won't someone please think of the raping, murderous child?